Hi guys, another video, albeit from slightly different surroundings. As you may have noticed, my location has changed. I've left Milan for 10 days before the resumption of the Serie A football season and have decided to take a little jaunt south to the wonderful city of Naples. Today I'd like to talk some more about my career as a conference interpreter and particularly how I got started in this wonderful industry. It's not a particularly happy tale, it involves a massive failure as a bit of a spoiler, but we'll get on to all of that in due course. We need to go way back to 2008, nearly a dozen years now, because I qualified from UCL. I got my bachelor's degree in French and Italian, and I have to be honest, I was slightly embarrassed by my level of spoken French and Italian, so I resolved to spend a year in Italy once I graduated. We English native speakers are quite fortunate in that we have the possibility to go all over the world and teach English. You can always find willing students. I had some experience of teaching English, having worked in summer camps for Italian kids across Italy, and that's what allowed me to get a job in the deep south of the country in Brindisi. Salento, Puglia, I'll leave that particular regional debate for another day. Nevertheless, a wonderful experience for a year. I made a lot of friends, particularly Italian friends, because I was involved in the local rugby setup, the third tier. It sounds a lot more glamorous than it actually was. One of those friends from the rugby team actually was involved in a number of extracurricular activities, including a fair trade organisation. And this particular organisation invited one of their suppliers, who was an Indian gentleman who produced handmade wooden toys, to speak to them about how these toys were made, the production process, and what his belief system was. My boss at the British School of Brindisi had been there for many years. She was English, she had married an Italian, and her spoken Italian was wonderful. I have to say, with a touch of hubris or perhaps naivety, I thought my level of spoken Italian was a lot better at that stage than it perhaps was. Needless to say, when she wasn't there to interpret for this Indian gentleman that produced the handmade wooden toys, my friend asked me if I would step in. I had no idea what was involved at all. I thought that interpreting was simply a case of speaking the two languages. I'm not even sure I had a notepad and pen, something that I referred to recently in another video. Nevertheless, I gamely turned up, stood up, sat alongside this gentleman, and very quickly realised it was a disaster. I was working from English into Italian, which I was very taxing. I had no ideas as to the fact that within interpreting, you have an A language for your mother tongue, a B language for a language that you're able to interpret into, which is almost akin to a mother tongue in terms of the proficiency you have in it, and then a C language, a language from which you have a passive, of which you have a passive understanding, and from which you can then interpret into your A language. I had no idea that naturally it would have been much easier had the gentleman been speaking Italian and I could have interpreted into English, but even then, in all honesty, I would not have been in a position to do it in terms of experience, in terms of self-confidence, and in terms, naturally, of technique. Needless to say, after 2 or 3 very awkward minutes, I really struggled also to cut through quite a thick Indian accent when he was speaking English as well. I decided to give up, mainly because someone in the audience was doing a much better job interpreting than I was. Needless to say, I got confused between the word for artisan, artigiano, and artisanal, artigianale. So that shows you what sort of level my Italian was at in terms of a noun and an adjective from that perspective. So I went off with my tail between my legs. I felt immensely embarrassed. I did eventually see the colleagues at the Fair Trade Organisation of my friend, and we had a bit of a laugh about it. But I forgot all about interpreting. I wasn't even sure that that is the name that you would give to that particular experience. So far removed was it from what I now do. Nonetheless, a year later, I had since moved to Avignon in the south of France. Long story short, my Italian had improved exponentially during that year in Puglia. But then unfortunately my French had become a bit rusty in the meantime, so I then decided to move from Italy to France. I worked as a language assistant in 3 French primary schools, and I actually went back to Brindisi to visit that same friend, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with my life at that stage. I was coming to the end of 2 years of teaching following my bachelor's degree, my undergraduate degree, and I had no idea what to do. I had a vague notion of continuing to teach English, first in Australia and then in Brazil. At the time, I was rather cringily calling it FAB, France, Australia, Brazil. Awful. In fact, you could actually go with Italy, France, Australia, Brazil. IFAB, the International Football Association Board. That might have been a slightly better clue as to what would ultimately become my life and my career. I spoke briefly with my dad. He said, okay, so you've decided to become an English teacher. I said, oh God, no. I'm not even sure I enjoy English teaching that much. So I was going through a slight existential crisis with regards to my career and my prospects. And this same friend said to me, have you considered working as an interpreter? I thought he was taking the mick out of me, given that I had so spectacularly crashed and burned just 12 months prior, in his presence no less. But we went on the internet, we looked at the requirements on the EU website for what it takes to become a conference interpreter. I then discovered all about C languages and A languages in particular, and realised that I didn't necessarily need to speak a foreign language in the same way that I speak English. So I applied to the University of Bath. I was accepted, but when they called me for an interview, it came in the midst of the Icelandic volcano eruption. I phoned up the admissions team and said, look, is there any way that we can be a bit more practical about this and do the interview over the phone or over Skype? And they said, lots of other of your contemporaries are making the effort to come to Bath to attend the interview in person. We thoroughly recommend that you do likewise. So I jumped on a high-speed train from Avignon to Calais. My flight had obviously been cancelled. Once I got to the ferry port in the north of France, it was a nightmare because there was a mile-long queue for the foot passengers for the ferry, but I was able to hitch my way onto a car that had already paid. They had a spare seat or two in the car for a small fee, and I was able to get to Bath. I was then accepted on the course, and the rest, as they say, is history. So it just goes to show, I don't know whether it was extrinsic motivation in that I wanted to prove a point to someone else after that slightly humiliating experience that I had endured in Italy, and it was all my own fault, or whether it was intrinsic motivation, whether I had it within me, I wanted to prove a point to myself and didn't want to necessarily give up and have that negative memory. Nonetheless, I studied on a master's course, I qualified as a conference interpreter, and that's what I do today. Anyway, just a quick personal experience there to show the power of perseverance, I would suggest, and also to make sure that you thoroughly research and look into any job before accepting it. I'm just very fortunate that it was a small fair trade organisation. There were no cameras there. I dread to think what might have happened if I had taken a football press conference in front of the international media with TV cameras all over the shop. That could have been an even more embarrassing experience. Anyway, that's all for today. I'll be back with another video very shortly. In the meantime, give me your thoughts, comments, like the video if you enjoy it. Please keep subscribing. We're close to that threshold of 150, which would be a nice little milestone to reach. What about you? Have you had any embarrassing or humiliating experiences? Have there been any experiences which have really helped you to form that character and you've been able to push on from them? I'd love to hear from you. See you on the next one. Cheers, guys.